So we're just going live to Westminster Magistrates Court, where the former BBC presenter Huw Edwards is now leaving the building. He has been given a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse image offences, meaning that he does avoid going to prison. So a lot of media interest, a lot of press there, including our colleague Seema Katecha, as Huw Edwards leaves Westminster Magistrates Court here in central London. Following that sentencing, the suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse images. And just to add, as Huw Edwards drives away, he will also be required to complete a sex offenders programme. He will also be on the sex offenders register for 7 years. So just monitoring that live shot as Huw Edwards left Westminster Magistrates Court, and a media scrum there as you would understandably predict. We have had previously, a few moments ago, a statement from the BBC on the sentencing saying that the BBC we are appalled by the crimes he has betrayed, not just the BBC, but the audiences who put their trust in him. So that BBC statement coming into BBC News from a spokesperson there saying that we are appalled for his crimes. He has betrayed not just the BBC, but the audiences who put their trust in him. And of course, a lot of more reaction had come in from the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, who had issued a statement as well saying that this sentencing sends a clear message that the CPS, we will bring offenders to justice. Claire Brinton from the CPS saying that accessing indecent images of children perpetuates the sexual exploitation of them, which has deep, long-lasting trauma for these victims. The CPS and the Metropolitan Police were able to prove that Edwards was receiving illegal images and videos involving children via WhatsApp, and that this prosecution sends a clear message that the CPS, working alongside the police, will work to bring to justice those who seek to exploit children. And the image that we are showing you is a photo that was taken of Huw Edwards after his arrest in November. Today is the first time that we are seeing it. It was released by the Metropolitan Police, and this custody images of these offenders are often released after they are sentenced, which is why we are seeing this image of Huw Edwards for the first time, although it was taken after his arrest back in November. So we've just witnessed that live shot of Huw Edwards leaving Westminster's Magistrates Court after that sentencing, a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse images offences, and including that he will be required to complete a sex offenders programme, and he will be on the sex offenders register for 7 years. So Paul Connew, former media editor at The Mirror, rejoins us. I know you've been with us all day, Paul, as we watch there live Huw Edwards leave Westminster Magistrates Court. Obviously that suspended sentence means, as I mentioned beforehand, he does not spend time in prison.
Unless, of course, he reoffends. I think you're going to have probably a less sympathetic, that's quite the word, reaction in the court of public opinion, and indeed across much of social media and parts of the mainstream media over the sentence. I think a lot of people will actually think it should have been on the sex offenders register for life rather than 7 years. But it's not the end of the story in terms of the BBC, who quite rightly issued a damning statement a few minutes ago. But the political fallout isn't over, as well as the media fallout. I'm told that the Media and Culture Select Committee almost certainly will want to investigate the BBC's handling of the Huw Edwards case, including the continued payment of his salary. And And they will also, I'm sure as part of that, want to grill the chairman, the director general, and possibly some other senior executives. And let's not forget, there's been turmoil within the BBC here. I know BBC journalists who were dismayed that they were in the dark even after senior figures were aware of the nature, not the exact detail, but the nature of the charges that the investigation and likely charges against Huw Edwards. And if you remember, Newsnight came under some criticism internally when they did an item about improper messages to younger colleagues, where some in the BBC thought that was being disloyal rather than doing legitimate investigative journalism. There's a matter of opinion on that, but certainly the BBC have some awkward questions to answer still. Both, I'm sure they're going to still get a lot of criticism in the media and social media, but also, as I said, they will be facing political questions too.
Paul, obviously a very difficult situation. And as you said, we have had that statement from the BBC. The BBC also over the weekend was talking about that it's important to remember who the villain in all of this is, as we also remember the victims in all of this.
Yes, I mean, I'm the editor who was legally thwarted in 1994 from exposing Jimmy Savile. They're very different cases, but the common denominator, I mean, I appeared in documentaries for the BBC looking into the BBC's own failures on it. It does raise the question of whether big name stars, big talent as they're known, don't get the same scrutiny that they should have. And there's almost a fear of investigating rumours or allegations or claims. And a few days ago, we had an open letter criticising or calling for Huw Edwards to go to jail from the mother of the 17-year-old who figured in that original Sun story. I suspect that she will be appearing in at least one newspaper tomorrow, criticising the fact that he is not going to jail. This story is going to run for some time yet. It's BBC would like, I'm sure, understandably, for this to be closure, but it's not going to be closure. And the headlines tomorrow will reflect that, even on a day when you had an assassination attempt again on Donald Trump and a very important trip to Italy by the Prime Minister. I still think that public opinion is on balance going to hold the view that the sentence today was too light, rightly or wrongly. That's not a personal opinion of mine. It's what I think the public reaction will be across social media and from some of the mainstream newspapers.
Well, the CPS is saying that in their statement is saying that this sends a clear message, that they say that this will bring a message that they do bring offenders to justice. We were just talking to a highly experienced lawyer who deals with such cases.
He was sceptical about that, yeah.
Who was, yes, he didn't feel that was the case at all. What's your assessment?
It's a huge check. This is a major problem. Online child abuse, and it'd be interesting to see if the Edwards case in any way becomes drawn into the still pending online harm bill that's going through Parliament. But the police have a huge challenge on hands purely because of the number of offences, and it's very hard to tackle. Yes. Obviously, people are brought to justice, but a lot get away with it. And as your experienced lawyer commentator was saying, people wait for years for justice on this to even make complaint statements. It is very, very difficult. This is a massive problem, and Huw Edwards, in a sense, this represents the huge, high-profile downfall of a household name, but. Household names are one thing, there are children being abused on and offline that are being buried and are not getting anywhere near the police, or certainly not anywhere near a courtroom and a prosecution.
Where, just then, in terms of where the money needs to be spent in order to speed this up, because as you mentioned, our lead lawyer was saying that this impacts people. It can take 30 years, if ever, kind of working through it, the victims of this. So where do resources need to be aimed at in order to speed up the process, but also to stop it from happening in the first place?
Without being flip, that's a question you need to direct at Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. In times when budgets are tight, the country is in a fiscal crisis, whether you argue whether it's 22 billion or a bit less. It's going to be difficult to actually put the money into that budget. Of course, morally it should be, but I wonder where the monetary is coming from. I'm sure we'll have from the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, we'll have damning statements about the Edwards case, but I don't see them suddenly coming up, shaking a magic money tree about, huge amounts being put into investigations into child abuse, online or off, which means that the justice system, that the police and the CPS struggle.
As you say, there are a number of big news stories on today, not least the attempted assassination attempt of the former President Donald Trump. As you mentioned, you've got Sir Keir Starmer is in Rome. He is meeting with his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni. They're talking about migration at the top of the agenda there, and no doubt lots of other issues. Hence, possibly why we haven't quite yet had a statement from the Prime Minister on this. But just what does this say in terms of our media agenda, you as a former expert in all of this, that we are focusing in on this headline?
Despite Trump, despite the Prime Minister's trip to Italy, I'm sure that at least some of tomorrow's national newspapers will be leading on Huw Edwards. And I'm sure that leader columns and probably some columnists will be commenting on whether this is the right sentence or he's got off relatively lightly. Despite the mitigation, I think a lot of people will feel that justice hasn't fully been served here. Again, I stress that's not a personal opinion, but it's how I see the landscape in the media over this case. It's also worth remembering, I'm sure, I haven't heard it specified, but I imagine that part of the sentence will mean that Huw Edwards won't have access to a computer in the future.
It's an interesting point, Paul, and apologies for interrupting and speaking over you, but we've just got to move on. Paul Connew there, who is the former editor of the Sunday Mirror newspaper, media commentator, who spent the morning with us. Really appreciate that. We are crossing over to speak to our culture and media editor, Katie Razzle, who joins us live from the newsroom. And Katie, we're just digesting this news, this sentencing, and the end of Huw Edwards' career, arguably.
Absolutely. I think not arguably 100% the end of his career. And that was one of the things that the magistrate said. The barrister speaking on behalf of Huw Edwards said one of the mitigating factors was the fact that he's had this huge fall from grace, that he has lost his standing within the BBC, but also across the nation, that he was arguably the most trusted face of journalists, the most recognisable journalist in the country, as the magistrate put it. And that has all fallen and gone. But the magistrate said, I'm not taking that into account in mitigation because, as he said to Huw Edwards, you have brought this upon yourself. And there was a moment in court where I did wonder whether he was going to give him a custodial sentence. He said, the magistrate, that these are very serious offences against children and that he would be facing a 12-month custodial sentence, but that there were these mitigating factors. And those mitigating factors included the fact that Huw Edwards had pleaded guilty at the very first opportunity, so that was the court appearance in July, the fact that he was showing, as the magistrate put it, genuine remorse, the fact that he was suffering from a mental health disorder, particularly through the period of time when he was engaging with this person, Alex Williams, who'd contacted him on social media, and then started to send him these images, explicit images, including these 41 images, indecent images of children. So the magistrate took all of those into account when he suspended the sentence for Huw Edwards and said he was getting a suspended 6-month sentence and would need to take part in a compulsory sex offender prevention programme, amongst other things.